Make some noise. Make some noise. All the art schools in the building. Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness gracious.
Oh, thank you very much. I'm an alumni.
So listen, LeSean, man, we got NYU in the building, we got Columbia, we got SCAD, we got Parsons, FIT. We're gonna get right into it, man. How in the world did you make Cannon Busters happen?
When Netflix approached me, I think it was in 2018, they had seen, I did a Crunchyroll short called Children of Ether prior to that. And I think for them, it was right around that time where Crunchyroll actually was trying to do originals. I think they were the first one to really try to approach doing originals. I think they were owned by Elation at the time. And so John Dodarian and my team at Manga UK were in the process of trying to land a deal with a show around the time when Netflix was expanding their network and their connections. And when we first were approached to make the show, Netflix wanted to buy the whole thing. And I wanted to own, a percentage of the rights. And so Netflix is not going to finance something that they don't own. And that's just smart business. And so we had to raise the funds for the rest of the series. I don't really know I think it was almost 90% or 80%. We talked about that. And then, so we had a partner in the UK, a UK bond completion company, who also came in with parts of the funds. And then there was another company called Nada Holdings, who was based in Taiwan. And they jumped on the project because at that time, Netflix was not in Taiwan yet. And so they wanted to have their first dibs on a project that was connected to Netflix. Because at that time in 2016, 17, Netflix was very, very sexy and very, very popular. And everyone was trying to get something on. This is before Netflix started canceling shows. and so, which is funny because companies cancel shows all the time, but for some reason we liked that Netflix didn't cancel shows until they had to do what every other company did and make more money. And so once the project was set up, we were already partnered with Satelight. And so part of the reason why the Taiwanese company wanted to get involved was because of that reason, but also the CEO of Nada Holdings was close friends with the vice president of Bilibili in China, which is basically the YouTube of China. And it's very hard to get stuff in China because they have, censorship clauses every 6 months. So it's hard to figure out what you can get aired there and how soon you can get your show cleared before they air it. And so the funny story is right when we were trying to close our deal with Nada Holdings, they communicated to me that Bilibili decided China owns Bilibili or regulates Bilibili. They didn't want hip hop in their music or anything. And partly because there was, and I can't qualify all of this, but the reasoning that I was given was that there were some musicians in China who were using hip hop to speak out against the government. And so China was like, yeah, we're not doing that. And any music that comes in that has hip hop won't get cleared, which was scary because we got this opening credit sequence called Showdown, and there's rapping in the beginning. And so we were just kind of we can't make Showdown without the rap song. It doesn't work without the rap song. And so those are examples of some of the challenges we had. But once we got this show greenlit, our completion bond company was very, very bullish. I don't know if you're familiar with this, but completion bond companies are there to make sure the money for the project is insured. We usually do this for live action, where you get a certain amount of money, and that money is insured, meaning that the completion bond company makes sure that they're counting every penny so that all the money goes where it's supposed to so you can complete the show because it's all insured. And so let's just say we talked about this, for me, even I had to take a physical before I started on the production because, a lot of these actors have to take physicals and take, health checks before they take on these bonded projects. So usually for independent films or really, really big films. And because once they start production, if they have some sort of physical ailment or something they didn't know that delays them from showing up or performing, they get sued. And so I've never had a completion bond company have to cover an animated series, but that was just the unique nature of how this project came together with Netflix. And so I had to do my checks. I had to do my physicals. Everyone else did. And then once the project got started, the challenge was to make the show with a Japanese company like Satelight, because obviously Japanese government and culture is very different from the United States. For example, it was a little bit rocky in the beginning, not in a negative way, but just business communication with myself and Manga UK and Netflix and Satelight. You know, having a bond company come in and check over the dollars and cents is unique for a Japanese company that's used to getting their money from production committees. And production committees are usually a collective of different entities, you know, King Records, Dentsu TV, toy companies, manga publishers, all get together for these adapted mangas that get turned into series, and they all pull their money together to make sure they get a cut of the merchandise. And that's how these studios are used to working with anime. But with me being a gaijin and having all of these people coming involved, not a holdings attached, Billy has rights. They want to make sure they get their cut. And the bond company had all the money. And so they wouldn't release money unless they could make sure that all the money was going to where it needed to go. And so, for example, you know, Satelight was in a position at the beginning where they're like, I'm throwing out a number here. We need 500 grand to start, you know, release these funds so we can start production. And the UK company's looking at the numbers in the books, and they're like, you only have 3 animators here. Why do you need 500K? And so the Japanese are like, we don't like that y'all are in our books like that. And so there was a lot of that for a very long time, which you don't really think about. That happens quite a lot. And so once we got through all of that stuff, production started to move forward. And there was some cultural challenges. I got some questions ahead of time about some of the challenges that come with that. There's a lot of questions about Japanese animation and cultural difference, in particular with Black Americans when we engage with this media. And one of them is like, you know, how do you work with them? What's the communication working with Japanese talent?
For sure.
You know, and like, what's the culture like? And it starts with making TV show culture. If you've never made a TV show before, if you've never been a showrunner or an executive producer in film and TV, you're not gonna really understand how different it is to be an executive producer and a showrunner in film and TV in Japan. Most people's engagement with anime is as consumers. They don't make
No one's traveling.
Yeah, no one's traveling. Yeah. And so very few are in America as executive producers in TV and film. And so that was something that I had learned that was a challenge. Not really a challenge, but just like an eye-opening experience. The good news is that I had a lot of experience producing shows, directing shows. So problem solving is something that I'm looking forward and keeping an eye on for. But generally, the cultural aspect is different, you know, so.
Yeah, and then also, I mean, some of the things you once over that, I think if you could double back on, you know, you have this bond completion company. You're essentially raising funds, right? You're going in, you're raising funds to then be able to come to Netflix and say, hey, listen, I also have, you know, I have this money. Let's get it going, right?
Well,
but
Netflix came with the money.
Yes.
They give out blank checks because they have a lot of banks that are very invested in them, that's willing to give them the money. So a lot of times, especially in those days, I'm not sure how it works now, but Netflix will have a blank check. They'll say, we have this bank, you know, you start production and we'll pay you at the end, you know? And so a lot of them are working in that way. And so, and they're also giving you their money. It's not your money in the context of like.
It's their money.
It's their money.
Yeah.
And so for them, sometimes we get wrapped up in the idea of being the creator. It's my creation, yada, yada, yada. I want, you know, now that I've got my show greenlit, I got to have my vision. And it's like, yeah, all right, but
it's my money.
It's my money. And so like, if you go into a restaurant, you know, we talked about this. You go into a restaurant and you say, you know, I want a hamburger and I want it made this way. And the chef comes out and he gives it to you raw. What do?
You don't pay for it.
I'm not paying you. You better cook my shit the way I want it. And that's how these corporations work, because it's not just their money. It's their employees' money. It's their HR's money. It's their, you know, pensions and their health plans and their benefits. All of that stuff is taken from a pool against your IP, a broke person who has no money to give these corporations, and they want to make a return on their investment. Not only do they want their money back that they've spent, but they want an investment. They want a profit. And if your show doesn't do that, what happens? You can be on the side and be like, oh, they canceled my show, but now we got to fire some people because we took a risk on your work. And so it's the same in Japan in a similar context.
Yeah, and so within that process, though, so you know, you now get these funds. You know, they say, okay, here's my money. let's go do something. You had already been working on this project prior to, right? And so there is, one thing you just mentioned too, having this kind of emotional attachment to the work. But one thing as we've talked over the week, there's you're able to kind of delineate and understand from all your experiences how to navigate within that in order to not only produce a major project and really help people feed their families and have a job and work throughout time, right? Because you're a creative leader, right? You're someone who's actually, producing these intellectual properties, right? These IPs. Talk a little bit about that process, right? Like you had already been working on this when you were in Korea.
Well, I think for me, I'm really glad you brought up that part because for me, we as creatives, we tend to get really attached to our ideas when it's just us by ourselves, trying to convince ourselves that this thing is going to be a thing. And then by the time it gets in front of someone who's willing to really put it on the stage that we want it to be, we try to make sure that our enthusiasm is still attached to the project. And sometimes if you're not familiar with the speed of that, you can only have well, what about me? This is my thing. This is my vision. And that's the part where you become a business person and you have to sort of partition that. The admin and the executives who work for the corporation, many of them are not creatives, but they have creative jobs. They have responsibilities creatively. And they're also in the same way. They feel that they have some investment on having impact on the product as a creative, especially under their watch. And so it's usually that you have to navigate. And so for me, I understood very quickly that it was more about getting the show done and knowing when to let go of certain things at the budget level, at the creative level, that goes a little unseen when these audiences are receiving this stuff packaged and finished and they're binging it in one session and then go out and talk about what they liked or didn't like about it. All of those things are in the work. And so for me, I had to learn how to let go a little bit of the project to make space for other creatives who are bringing their brand to it. Because the goal actually, what happens is once it goes from being just your project and with other people, you now have to think about the other people because you have to keep morale going. There's hundreds and hundreds of people that you're employing over a span of 2.5, 3 years in multiple regions, from scripts in English to localization and Japanese writers to producers, executives, in between the studios in China, studios in Korea. And that's not before you get to post-production, music, acting, and all that. So it is a lot of stuff that you are managing. And a lot of people who engage with the finished product don't understand that. They maybe have an idea, and they may be even really big fans of the process, but they truly don't really get an idea of what you have to sacrifice to let go of your project so that more people can be involved. Because I'll keep it a buck. Like, I could have done a lot of things with Cannabuses if I wanted to do it. I could have totally linked on everybody and got what I want. And depending on your personality, you might be open to doing that. You'll get what you want, but no one will ever want to work with you again. Ever. Like, yeah, I like this. Nah, I don't like that. Do it my way. Okay, cool. And then they go to the next project like, man, LeSean, whatever.
One thing you said is getting the sauce. You got to, you get that extra something when you really build a relationship.
That's
that
really
little extra thing that makes the design come out more or the sequence work more.
That's a good point. And this is the part about co-productions and cross-pollinating regions. You know what I'm saying? Like, most of our shows in the States, there's less now. There's way more local animators in the States. There's a web gen culture now. You can do things locally, but you still need to have a producer. You need to have a production manager. You need to have a production design in place, and you need people in one space. And we tend to forget that this stuff is still outsourced. You know what I'm saying? And so when you're working in your native area or in your local area and you're a contractor working on a show that's coming from another country, you kind of detach from it. You have this person that you never meet. They're speaking another language and they're sending you tons of notes. And your response to that note is like, I'm gonna just do this. I don't know this dude, whatever. And it's kind of service work. It's work that you do, but it's not work that you're gonna do for your homie. Exactly. You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah,
and so it's really important. That's why I decided to move to Japan because, the same reason why I moved to South Korea, I wanted to be around where the sausage is made. And not everyone wants to be that way, but for me, my upcoming and my romanticism around the process of film directing and TV, I want to be involved. I want to be like these Japanese animators and directors and creators that I look up to. They get to be there for the whole process. And so I made it a mandate for me to live in Japan with Netflix when this project was finally funded, with all of the people involved at Netflix to get it going so that I can be there from the beginning, middle, and the end, especially main production. And one thing I learned about that is that And just for the record, I don't speak Japanese. I had an assistant who was my interpreter and translator throughout the entire process. And that's kind of how it works for me. I took 3 months of language courses, but you can't be like hajimamashite in a meeting where it's like high level technical discussions and deadlines and milestones and numbers and stuff. I'm just like, let me just shut up.
Walking in like genki.
And then I just talk about making my show. You know, the other thing about that part, you know, the letting yourself go is understanding that you have to now learn how to communicate your vision to completely different people, and they all still have to get it. That is a skill that you have to develop. Or if you don't have the mind to manage that, you're gonna have to leave it to whoever the company who owns the project put on the show as the executive producer, the showrunner. The showrunner is the person who deals with people, time, and money. And you need someone who knows how to make those things and deliver them to finish. And it's not just being a creator. You have a lot of creators of shows that can't make a show. They'll be the creator, they get the credit. But someone else is the executive producer, and the executive producer is the person who's the producer above all the other producers, making sure they're all doing their thing. And so for me, that experience really helped me because it taught me how to let go of some things. And more importantly, my favorite animators on my show, I had to be friends with them. I had to go out and have drinks with them, and I'm not a drinker. And in Tokyo, they don't smoke weed out there.
Oh man, so, but boy do they drink.
They don't smoke out there. Weed is wildly illegal, and so you have to drink because that's how everybody engages in Japan. And so I'm just like, I'm gonna gain 10 pounds out here. You know, but that's what you have to do. And so those are the, you know, that's the challenge of holding on to something, having it your idea for a very long time, and then you have to share that idea with other people. I used to do this thing, I still do this thing where I'll have like Post-its that I do for myself to sort of remind myself of why I'm making this at the very beginning. And then when things get a little weird and rocky, I have to go back to it and be like, okay, this is the reason why you're doing it. This is the reason why you're doing it. Because it can get lost as you encounter these new experiences, new seasons. You know, these people are regular folks. And so for me, I had to let go a little bit so that I can get, because look, you know, you have your own idea, but when you add this many people, it becomes something you never really imagined when it's all done, because you don't have the creative bandwidth to, one, not only do all the jobs, you don't have the aptitude to do all the jobs because they're all happening at the same time, but the show becomes something much bigger than you had imagined. And that humbles you when the project is finished versus when it starts. So for me, the cultural differences is what I had to overcome, and part of those cultural differences was learning to let go of the project and let some parts of itself move itself, you know? And so, and then when you're done, it's over. And then you're like, okay, how can I do this again? I want to do this for my next project. Or someone sees that you can complete a project from script to final delivery, and they bring you on to another project as a co-EP. And so that's one of the challenges that I had to overcome in terms of holding on to something for a very long time and then letting it go and letting the team sort of, you know, direct the show. It's kind of like a dog chases its tail dynamic to the finish line, you know what I'm saying? And so that's a process that I had experienced on a larger scale that I took some valuable lessons from.
When you were developing Cannon Busters, was it something around, you know, how obviously we're watching these in episodes, right? But when you were originating the idea, did you see it as a feature? Did you see it, like, how did you perceive it? And then how did it kind of transform as you were going through the business of it all?
I mean, for me, in terms of like how I conceived it, it was just a love letter to Final Fantasy. It really was. You know, all of the stuff that's in Cannon Busters when I was creating the idea was stuff that I liked in JRPGs. You know, and JRPGs, in my opinion, at their height in the 90s, in the mid-90s, and the 80s, you know, Final Fantasy 3. We call it Final Fantasy 3. Is it Final Fantasy 3? Final Fantasy 3 is the first Super Nintendo version, you know. And you had Magitech, and you had Samurai, and you had Cowboys, and you had Westerns. And it's funny, when that project came out, there was a lot of, you know, people love the show, but you know, you always pay attention to the criticism, because when you're doing new things in a medium, you always want to see why people react to things a certain way. And a lot of people were like, yeah, well, it doesn't make any sense that he has these castles and now he's got robots and he's got yada, yada, yada. I'm like, these kids must not like Final Fantasy, because that's all None of that stuff
all Final Fantasy.
None of that stuff's Japanese. It's all reverse engineered Eurocentric fantasy, which is fascinating for a Japanese company. And so for me, I think a lot of it comes from them, who's making it. You know what I'm saying? And so for me, I always intended it to be a series because I'm inspired by Shinichiro Watanabe, you know, the creator of Cowboy Bebop and Samurai Champloo. And I like a lot of other shows, but I'm a fan of OVAs, and that's where a lot of that stuff comes from. So for me, I always envisioned it as a series.
When you were pitching it as right, so you pitched it, you got it, and you sit there in front of them and you say, I want to do you say I want to do the series, or do they say, hey, let's do 3 episodes, 4 episodes,
it's different
6?
because at that time, this was Netflix, and they were looking for a lot of people, and they're still looking for a lot of people. Contrary to the way things seem, there seems to be a contraction of IP, expansion in this era, and that's from the COVID. I think we're coming out of that slowly. But it was more about, you got to remember, like Netflix, and we talked about this. Netflix, in my experience as a content, I keep saying content creator. I'm not a content creator.
You're not a content creator.
I'm an IP creator.
Okay.
Content creators are Twitch, YouTube streamers. That term has changed over time, and I don't want to conflate what I do with the younger generation who identifies content with streaming. I create TV shows, and so, for me, Netflix was looking for just new voices because they couldn't, in my opinion, as a consumer and as a creator, I don't think they could compete with Hollywood. That's why they chose to go global. Netflix doesn't have a Gone with the Wind or Titanic or Terminator 2. These legacy studios, Warner Brothers, Disney, Nickelodeon, that have created these classics that we've all become used to through the TV and film era. Now we're crossing over into this sort of weird, ubiquitous space called streaming. It's kind of like what happened when, CDs and records went to MP3s. We didn't really know what to do with the MP3 when music went digital, because we're used to Nielsen sound scans and used to seeing tangible, things. And TV's kind of going in that same realm. And so when Netflix expanded, they were just like, what they saw in me wasn't, oh, let's put this guy on because he's black. Oh, let's put this guy on because it's, we need to give black dudes a chance, or Black Lives Matter. It wasn't any of those things. They saw someone who had the ability to speak to large groups of people, have a singular vision, and have them enthusiastic for 3 years straight to deliver the product. That is a very, very obscure thing. It's the reason why there are more workers than showrunners in TV animation. Most people are working for the showrunners. And so they saw that I can deliver a product. They don't really care about race, they care about aptitude. And I'm just saying that from how I got the project. They saw me as someone who can complete projects. And even when I was making Cannon Buses at Netflix before, and when we were negotiating Yasuke, they were offering me other projects than co-EP. Because they're like, you know how to finish shows. That's rare. You ever see shows that you don't like? Because everything's subjective, right? We have our objective interpretation of the work, and then we have our subjective interpretation of the work, and then there's the objective truth about the work. And the objective part is never really talked about. The objective part is getting everyone paid, feeding families, and getting out of them their best work on budget, on time. That's the objective truth that is the accomplishment that a lot of these studios look for. In terms of the audience, that's just the bag. Okay, well, it's still a product. We still have to make money from this thing. And so they're conflated. That's why it's called commercial art. And so, they were looking at me as like, wow, this dude has a unique voice. He has the ability to not only have a clear vision about what kind of, coded work he wants to communicate, but he understands the genres. He understands how to get people talking with his work. And we also understand that this is the time period where being black is politicized, and this guy is telling these high-quality production stories featuring black characters that are for adults, TVMA. And that's what Netflix was interested in. They weren't really interested in how many episodes we want to do, or do we want to do this with you or not. And so, we agreed on the 12-episode run because I didn't want to do anything too long, because at that time they were talking to me about doing other things, and I don't really like to work on long series projects. The other important thing of the reason why they greenlit the project was because I was already experienced. I'm coming to them as a supervising character designer and co-director of the Boondocks. I'm coming in as a producer and supervising director of Black Dynamite. I already have experience creating TV shows and helping TV shows to the finish line. And that's what they see. That's why so many of the talent that they're bringing at the admin level are all coming from the legacy studios, because Netflix is not a legacy studio. Netflix is like, in my opinion, they're like Uber. And all of the legacy studios, the Disneys, the Warner Brothers, the Paramounts, the Nickelodeons, the Universals, those are old taxi cab companies. And now those old taxi cab companies also have apps, but it's the same service. Netflix is still trying to go global. They have to go global because they knew that Hollywood doesn't care about going global. They only care about who wants to follow them. And so that's why we stay here. Netflix is not doing a Paramount Korea and giving them $2 billion to make Korean dramas. We would have never gotten Squid Game from Hollywood. They're still patting their backs over doing Crazy Rich Asians. You know what I'm saying? And so
Facts.
And so for me, like when it came to that point, they were looking at that. They weren't the episode count didn't matter. They were more concerned of once they agreed this is what I wanted to do, then it was like, okay, let's do 12 episodes and see where it goes and play with that narrative.
That's awesome. The pitch itself, right? Because one of the things I really enjoy about the story, and obviously we've talked many times, but we've onced over in our times in these conversations, kind of in an educational space. But what did you actually give Netflix? Like, what did they receive to say like, this is it? This is our amazing project.
It was several things. It was a package deal. We had several pilots. We had the Cannabis pilot. We had the Children of Ether pilot, and we were just trying to show them like this is what finished quality could do. You know, it's really that simple. There's no magic bullet. I know you're trying to search for a magic bullet. There is no magic bullet, though. You run business. You know that it's simple than that. You just need to be able to deliver product. That's all it is. This is a business. This isn't I like you. It is kind of I like you, but you have to have product. People think, I've run into a lot of people who think making animation is just something you love to do, and I hope I get paid. No, it's the opposite. This is all
Facts.
Business, and it's no simpler than that. Can you finish product? I couldn't go to Netflix with a comic book and say, hey, you know, this is my comic. I want 18, 12, $10 million to make a series.
Yeah.
We've seen that happen, and that's probably what motivates us because comics are the cheapest way to have a proof of concept. You know what I'm saying? But pitching a comic, in my opinion, it's a great way to do it. It is a way. I don't think it is the way, but it is a way. And I think depending on your circumstances and your timing, that is a way to pitch a show. So I'm never going to say that's a wrong way. I'm not an expert. But for me, I come from animation. I don't need to make a comic to pitch an animated series. You need to give them an animated something so that they can show that the product can be done. They can show what you can do. And so for me, pitching a comic to get an animated series, because they're two completely different mediums, two completely different business. Manga is print media. That's it. TV and film is TV and film. And we often conflate the two, manga and anime, as if they're the same. They're talking about the Japanese business when they say manga and anime.
100%.
But they're never talking about the business. They're just talking about what they would like. Me pitching a comic to get an animated series is like putting cookies in the oven and hoping you get a pizza. It's just not the same. And so for me, you know, they saw that we had finished product and they wanted to move forward on that. And that's how things got moving off the ground. Getting to Japan, that was a whole other, you know, we touched on that was a whole other thing. Trying to get them to buy into the idea was another interesting challenge because it was about the cultural differences, you know, and them having different ideas of what black meant versus what my experience of what black meant. And so I think that was also interesting as well.
Well, also too, the reality is, you know, you had the experience, you had the skills, and they already knew that you could finish product, right?
Right.
Which gives you a certain amount of power, gives you a certain amount of ability to say what type of product you actually want to create.
Well, you actually have to have a clear vision because they really, you know, there's so many people trying to pitch shows to Netflix, they really don't have a lot of time to, especially in that era. We're in a different era now. And so, but yeah, it really depends on it. You know, that's why I'm being very specific about my era. The time and when I got this stuff made doesn't exist in the same way anymore. You know, there's a lot more legacy administration at Netflix because the legacy competition, the legacy studios are the competition for Netflix. And when you're a new startup, you want to convince the consumer who's used to getting polished product from the legacy studios that your product is the same. And so you will hire an executive at Disney to now handle a part of administration at Netflix so that we can say, okay, we got the studio's best people managing our product. You know, let's go that route. And, you know, Netflix did a similar thing with Netflix Animation where they were bringing a lot of, you know, kids and family talent over at one point to get them their own shows. You know what I'm saying? Because they wanted to convince the audience who are fans of those shows from the legacy studios that Netflix also has that cachet. What they do, same thing they do with live action. So, yeah.
And I think that leads me to more of the creative conversation, right? So you could have done anything. Really and truly, you had already cut your teeth. But now you took these characters in Children of Ether and then your Cannon Busters and you added a fantasy flair, right? Something different to it that was reflective of obviously your experience and perceptions, but wasn't the norm of what 12 Years a Slave, right? So how did you go about doing that?
That's funny you say 12 Years a Slave. I tend to call Yasuke 12 Years a Samurai. That's what people wanted. They wanted 12 Years a Samurai because a Black American made it. I think if a Japanese person made Cannon Busters, however, I think objectively, if a Japanese person who didn't speak English and had never been to Japan had popped up with Cannon Busters as is, I think people who love Japanese culture would be I wouldn't say way more accepting, but there would be a sense of enthusiasm and exuberance collectively around it because they love Japan. They want Japan to recognize them as a fandom. But when a Black man does it, there's different expectations because of that same audience and our history with the United States and what we expect from each other when it comes to popular media, in terms of normalizing Blackness in popular media. And so for me, the reason why I did fantasy is because, people are familiar with my past contributions to Aaron Magruder's work, to Carl Jones's work with Black Dynamite and Boondocks. But, I think for me, and I'm pretty sure there's some people who feel this way in the room, that's not our only, narrative when it comes to, imagination. And so for me, I really wanted to, again, I tell you all the time, these are audacity projects. To me, they're audacity projects. The audacity to make a show like Cannon Busters.
How dare you?
You did Boondocks, Black Dynamite, give us another nigga comedy, dog. Like, give us the shit that we like. You know what I'm saying? That's consumer. I don't conflate my race with that demand. But it's real easy to feel that pressure because we don't really get those opportunities, right? And so for me, it was like, nah, I want to do something that we don't really do. And when I say we, I mean our contemporaries who are privileged enough to be creators of shows, and then at the same time be the showrunner of those shows we created, and then be the director of those shows that we've showrun and created. There's a very unique distinction. Usually, you don't have all three. You have maybe two, and then another one put in place by the company because they want to ensure that they have the product, a certain way. And so for me, I wanted to do fantasy because why not? We don't do fantasy. Most of our stories, in my opinion, as a contributor to that, are usually segregated into these socioeconomical boxes. And that's part of our history because we talked about this earlier. We only got 55, 56 years of equality since civil rights. And that's a middle-aged white woman ago. And she's still alive.
She's here.
So for me, understanding that and having such long experience, in mining negativity from our past in the Boondocks to find comedy, and the same thing with Black Dynamite, I wanted to show what wonder looked like. Or at least a specific Black experience of wonder, because I'm not the guy. I'm just an idea. I am an idea of a spectrum of the Black experience and the Black imagination. And when you conflate our history and what we were not allowed to do with the demands of the industry and Business 101, there's no room for the spectrum of the Black experience, just room for what sells. And I think everyone in this room is familiar with that, whether they're consumers, whether they're creators themselves, many want to move beyond that. And I wanted to just use Cannon Busters as an excuse to center Black characters or Black-coded characters because these aren't
I was about to say that this doesn't take place anywhere near Earth. Earth doesn't even exist.
It's not a planet Earth. It's a planet called whatever, the land is Gearbolt. It doesn't matter. The whole point was to, try to play around like Star Wars, or Final Fantasy. Do we think those characters are Japanese in Final Fantasy? Probably.
I always say I don't know.
No one asks that. But when you put Black characters in the reality that we have with our history and our history in media, you don't really get to have a lot of wiggle room. So for me, I wanted to do something that was left field and introduce an idea of the Black-coded character that wasn't tethered to their race. People watch Cannon Busters and they'll go, yeah, this is cool, but is it Black though? And I just love that question. Because for me, it's like, I'm not here to perpetuate an idea. I'm Black. I've had a Black kid tell me, yo, I don't know how I feel about Cannon Busters. Yo, it's not Black enough. This dude's 14. I'm 49.
I've been here a little bit longer.
Well,
just a little bit.
You haven't been alive long enough, B. But I love that because that's you to ask that question. That's not me. It's not my job to interpret the art for you. It's not my right to. You understand? And so that's something that's new for us in animation, in my opinion, especially 2D. And I'm talking 2D animation. I don't really particularly vibe a lot with 3D animation. I use it as a tool to do things easier, like robots and crowd scenes, the same stuff we do in Japan. But I'm a proponent of 2D animation because I am in love with illustration. And illustration and filmmaking is 2D animation. It's filmmaking and illustration combined, and that's why I love 2D animation. And so I wanted to create an idea of entertainment that allows us to, I wouldn't say, I have my intentions of the work, but I never have expectations of the audience getting that intentions, because there's too much stuff, there's too much window dressing. It's an anime, it's brown characters, and so people are trying to unpack that stuff. And I think for me, I chose to do sci-fi fantasy because I wanted to not tether our narrative to Earth-based issues that we normally do. And when you have characters who are black-coded and they're not on Earth, what are we? It's like Star Wars. Earth is not a planet in the Star Wars universe. But you got niggas running around and no one saying anything about race. Why? Because there's a fucking talking lizard standing next to you. Do you understand what I'm saying? This is psychology. It's like an attempt to get you to think about what black really means. So when that kid said it's not black, I know what he's talking about. He's talking about what Hollywood has allowed us to do since Jim Crow and what he's been fed. You understand? Which is also true. We need those stories because black babies are turning, 18 every day. So we need them. As long as we're dealing with this marginalized nonsense, they need to keep seeing that stuff. And so I have much love for my liberal and conservative black American creatives who only want to create content to raise children, create content for kids and family. Also, that's at the behest of the studios because there's another flip side to it. Advertise-based broadcasting versus streaming. Advertising is based on selling to a target demographic, which is usually white boys 6 to 11 years old. And you create shows to sit in front of those kids to get them to tell their mom, buy me this, buy me that, buy me. That's the machine we're in. And when we don't see black kids, we're like, why are they not making black? I used to ask that question because I didn't understand the business. When Netflix showed up, that kind of went out the window because now it's about, the ubiquitous nature of content creation. And to my point, with Cannon Busters, I wanted to make it just an idea, someone to sit with it. Like that kid said, is it black enough? I know why he's asking that question because he doesn't see anything that he can conflate with the black American experience in Cannon Busters because they're not talking about Beyonce. They're not talking about the transatlantic slave trade. They're not calling each other nigga because those are Earth-based experiences. And in imagination, you should be able to go in different places. But because of our history, we are under immense pressure to let white folks know what happened to us. And so any window we get, whether it's poking at white folks, making them feel uncomfortable, or even having a dramatic approach to 12 Years a Slave, that's our narrative. And I hope we never stop telling those stories. However, 8 years of Boondocks and Black Dynamite, I just want to leave Earth, B. You understand what I'm saying?
I'm trying to go to another planet.
And I didn't have to mind anything negative from my past to make Cannon Busters. That was the other liberating part of it, which is what we need to do when we do Black Dynamite in the Boondocks. And those are great stories, and we need more of that stuff. I just think we should try to create space simultaneously so that we can explore other ideas of what imagination is. Why can't we have black-coded characters on a road show going nowhere? We love Seinfeld. That show's about nothing.
About nothing.
But when you have that many black characters in a cartoon, that shit better go somewhere. That's the pressure. Do you understand what I'm saying? And so for me, I wanted to, that's why I call it an audacity project. The audacity to take all that money and not do something to keep the message going. And that's where we are. I can't control that. I don't have any control over that. But that's the whole purpose of creating work. I think that's provocative. And Cannon Busters is a slow burn. I've had people come to me over the years, be like, yo, this show is crazy, the stuff that you're doing. Oh, you got this character who's got vitiligo and yada, yada, yada. And I'm just kind of like, this is 2024. Like, we should have been doing this stuff. But, it goes back to Business 101, history, our expectations of ourselves, and this sort of cry or despair or passion about, wanting to see more than what we're doing. And the reason why we don't do those things is because the place that we want those images comes from a place that requires millions and millions and millions of dollars, something we don't have,
Within so you get the creative, you understand where you're going, you have the North Star, you know what creative you're building. How do you manage a team? How many people are on this team that work through this?
Oh God, I mean, not including the South Korean team and We work with South Korea, we work with Chinese companies, in between houses. I don't know, man. Just a lot of people. My core team. It was me. It was Thomas Romain, who was my a French brilliant animator and creator. He's a creator of Oban Star Racers. He's also, he's a director of Oban Star Racers. He created co-created Code Lyoko, and he was the creator of Basquash. And he was there for 10 years. He was my original character designer and mechanical designer on the show. Then we had Kumagai-san, who was from 3x3i OVA that I loved. He came on board and helped that out. I had a bunch of different Americans helping out on the show. But primarily my Satelight team was just me, my producer, Kaneko-san, Natori-san, my series director, who represents Yumeta Company. And so because of the way this project was financed together with Netflix and these other companies, we had different people coming in. And because of our budget limitations, you know what I'm saying? And so I could pull up my emails and find out all the people I know, but generally it was a big team, so.
Big teams, you found that to be simple, hard,
No.
where did you find yourself in, because once again, I think a lot of times we have these conversations and we know that not everyone wants to manage a team. Not everyone wants to be the boss. Not everyone, right? But then everyone wants to, I'll just ask, how many of you want your own IP? Raise your hands if you want to create your own thing, right? How many of you want to manage 150 people?
Oh, look at that, yeah.
Okay. How many of you have managed 150 people?
Some school faculty here.
We got some school faculty. Yeah, the school faculty, you put your hands down. Jesus, for the college kids. But, we don't talk enough about being the manager and kind of being the person that has to deal with different personalities and on projects that can become stressful at times, but also, too, you spend a lot of time with the actual people. As you're working on these things day in and out, So how did you find your way and your space through that? You talked a little bit about your management style, but maybe, because it's something I think you have to develop over time. Talk about that a little bit.
I learned that from working in the industry, working on the Aaron Magruder. And a lot of the guys that I've worked on, ironically, I've been really privileged enough to work on big shows that have given me my biggest breaks, which were black men. And that's a very, very obscure experience for most brown people in TV animation. And so, especially now, there's a lot more brown people in animation, there's a lot more black Americans contributing at the production craftsmanship level, like storyboards and character designs and background colors. But for me, I learned from men who had shows who had never made a TV show before, like Aaron Magruder. He came from print media. He got his show Greenlight, and that was his first experience making a show. So I got to watch that experience while being a staffer. I used to work for studios that had more experienced show creators. Like I told you, my first animation job, official animation job, was here in New York City at Tape House Tunes. I was an assistant animator on the Lizzie McGuire show. And that show, it's the blonde girl who has a personality. When she has her own thoughts, a version of her is like a cartoon character. And that cartoon animation was done here in New York City. And I got that experience to seeing how that worked. And so by the time I worked with Aaron, I got to see how producers work, how showrunners work, mistakes being made. When you're trying to do new things, and then watching my contemporary Carl Jones rise in that route. And then when I moved to South Korea and I came back, Carl Jones had brought me on to help him finish his show, seasons 1 and 2. And that was also his first time making a TV series. But he had experience watching Aaron because he was been a part of the Boondocks for so long. And so by me watching them and working under them, I wanted to learn, I'm going to follow that. I'm probably not going to follow that if I want to do my own thing. And so by the time I started doing all these trailers and shorts, by the time I got to Children of Ether, this was like a truncated version of that. And so for me, it was more about taking each step at a time. Okay, and the way I worked, it was all based on milestones. Like, okay, I'm familiar with character design, but now I just get to say, I want to do this, I want to do that. Versus me being the one having to design all of, the characters or coming up with the designs, like, coming up with a design for Bushido Brown or me coming up with a design for Stink Meter or, like dealing with the pressure of that, the brainstorming and what to like and what not to like. Over time, you learn that. And so when you get in a position to do your own stuff, it's intrinsic within your thinking process. You're like, okay, let's see the designs. And anybody here who's working on their own stuff in college, you're already doing that. You know what your design process looks like. If you have a character designer helping you out, you can, make decisions and decide how you want to do that. In terms of Cannon Busters, it was just a much bigger team in Japan. And that's all it is. It's just a longer, bigger team. There's a lot more waiting to make decisions because there's more people involved. And so for me, it was, most of my lessons were learned in cutting corners and realizing, well, we got to cut this out of this show, because it's too much over budget. Or me learning, in terms of dealing with that many people, me learning that, me writing my scripts with my team and not being involved in the studio negotiation process with Netflix and Satelight hurt me. Because these studios that are negotiating these contracts with these Japanese studios, they're just so desperate to get the studio because they're all booked 3-4 years in advance. They're not checking in with me to say, hey, LeSean, what are we doing, half hour? They don't do that. They just come to me and say, okay, we got the studio. They did all the legwork. Meanwhile, we're with our writers writing 35-page scripts, 40-page scripts. And then when we get into Japan and we got the scripts localized in Japanese, the Japanese are like, yeah, this is a 45-minute episode. We're only contracted for 30 minutes. And so now you got to cut. And that's the experience that you learn, And so for me, that's one of the bigger challenges of dealing with multiple people and not really being involved in the sausage that I've gotten much better at, And so managing multiple people, that's one of the pitfalls of not being able to be aware. And that's the business aspect. The other aspect is realizing that people make these shows that we consume.
Say it again, one more time.
People make these shows. My relationship with Cannon Busters is never going to be the relationship with, it's never going to be the consumer's relationship with the product, because wherever they are in their lives, frustrated or unhappy, they clear out their bandwidth to watch this show, binge it, give their opinion, and then they go back into whatever they're dealing with in their lives. For me, it's a 3-year ordeal, and I'm building relationships, marriages, babies being born, deaths in the family. I'm financing these people's jobs, you know what I'm saying? Weekends, holidays, late nights, all-nighters, sleeping at the studio. You know what I'm saying? That's my relationship with the project. So when it's done, I'm just thinking about my friends. And when I watch my shows, I can't watch them anymore because now I'm like, oh man, we had to cut corners on that. I can't watch that. You know what I'm saying? Or yeah, it's unfortunate we lost this artist and that's why it looks that way. Meanwhile, the audience thinks this was all intended because the marketing's doing all the other work. And so for me, working with lots of people, that experience and the other experience of understanding the business aspect is one of the challenges of navigating this stuff, and going into that, especially when you're dealing with a lot of people. The good news is that in my experience compared to Americans, Japanese are a bit more like, let's just get it done. There aren't a lot of cowboys in Japanese production compared to the United States, where you can have an artist you can have an intern who's trying to rewrite the scripts.
You should change that part where
It's consumer culture. We're all trained to have emotional connections to the stuff we spend our hard-earned cash on. We look at a pair of shoes and we want to criticize them because we're about to give this hard-earned money. And then we use logic and rationale to justify the purchase. But it's always an emotional decision first. You know what I'm saying? And that's the same way with, people working on a project. When you finally get on the other side, you get a little sense of like, okay, I'm not on this side of the con table. I'm on this side now. But you still have that consumer fanboy mentality, and it takes you a while to get out of that. And when you're in large groups of people in the West, that's what you're usually fielding. But in Japan, everyone is kind of like, tell us what to do. And that took me a while to get used to as well, because I'm used to, someone come into the room and you're paying them, you want them to give you their best ideas, and you want them to be enthusiastic. If you're paying someone and they come, no, just tell me what to do, dog. You're like, that's not American, That is, you're being lazy or you're selfish or you don't care about the project. In Japan, it's the opposite. They don't want to fuck it up. And so just tell me what you need. You're still going to get the fire. Just tell me what you want. And I had to learn how to deal with that. So those are the aspects of working with different types of people in different cultures.
And also too, cross-culturally, large teams, all things that everyone who raised their hand will have a joy in working on, right? Because it's a beautiful thing. But it's even more beautiful when you get across the finish line. And I think what we do have to say about that is, we are lucky enough to actually be able to survey good leaders and not so great leaders in our wonderful country here, whether it be whether it be corporate or governmental. But then when something as beautiful as Cannon Busters comes out, right, or Children of Ether or Yasuke, you know, we're able to kind of really look to the creative leader and say like, well, listen, man, it's not just your IP. You know, you have families are happy, you know, children have been born, marriages have been had. All of these projects are very different though, right? And so within that, what we normally know and something that you've stated many times is people, they just come out with a part 2, right? It was like, oh, Terminator 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, right?
That's because it's successful.
Yeah.
That's the business. The audience is like, oh, I don't want to see another version of the original thing I just saw. That's consumer logic, in my opinion. That's your relationship with not wanting the same thing over and over. You want something different. You just want everyone to think you got your own style. So you're not going to rock the same thing. You want to, and we treat our food that way, and depending on how you are, we treat our clothing that way. We treat how we engage with media and cinema that way. We all want to feel like we have great taste, and we want to be the good representation and the good reference of. But we carefully curate those people too. We don't talk about that part. We carefully curate who we want to share our stuff with because we want them to like what we like as well, and so that's a big part of it.
And as you were shifting, right? Because these are also big creative ideas. These are, you know, Yasuke is a Pan-African.
But that's right.
Right? Cannon Busters takes place in
Some
the
other
universe.
Planet. They're not Earthlings.
Another place. They're not even Earthlings,
Yeah.
right? And even though the pigmentation might be the same.
Black-coded.
Right? Black-coded, right? It's
They're
not the
Earthlings.
same.
They're not Black Americans because America doesn't exist on this planet.
Yeah.
And real talk, like even Children of Ether, even though that's a short on Crunchyroll, that was me trying to, you know, show a mixed character, Afro-Latina. Rhonda Vega is an Afro-Latina. And so for me, I'm just playing around having worked in animation and TV animation at the executive level, at the producer level, and at the creative level, seeing these guys create these ideas and then having a whole team realize it. I'm like, what would my version of that look like when I get in the same position? And I've been privileged and lucky enough to be in that position. And so now I'm thinking, look at all of the blackness we did on Boondocks and Black Dynamite. We played around with all kinds of archetypes and types of black people and stuff like that, all based on our real life lived-in experience or satirical lived-in experiences as Black Americans. And so with these projects, I wanted to expand that a little bit. And some people get it and some people don't. But the idea is to add more nuance to what it means to be a black coded character or a black character in a genre outside of just comedy.
But in managing those teams, you also have to get, you're in another country, right?
That's
you're
right.
in another culture, and you have to get them to adjust or think about illustrating these characters and drawing these characters and directing these characters in ways that you feel fit the project, right? So, you know, talk about that a little bit.
You know, one of the great things about Japanese, again, is that they're really good at, you know, listening and being told what to do. And so you just have to really be on top of it. And I know from an American perspective, when you hear the term being told what to do, there's a sort of there's a reductive.
Don't be telling me what to do.
There's a reductive sentiment to that. So I just want to preface by saying them being told what to do, meaning tell me how to do it right. And so, you know, it's different because, you know, for Children of Ether, the original character designer that I brought on for that was my brother Ronald Wimberly. He's a very well-known illustrator, a comic book artist. We work together a lot. I brought him on to help me on Black Dynamite. You know, he went up to do great work. He's got, you know, history in your own, black history in your own word, in its own words. Prince of Cats. You know what I'm saying? Like, and so I love. Me and Ron go way back, and so. Whenever I would reach out to him, you know, either on the, you know, tell Carl to get him on the Boondocks, or me reaching out him directly to work with Children of Ether, you know, the Japanese are really good at following, you know, something that they're given, you know, image boards or whatever. So Brian was on board. Even with the world building and the world creation, a lot of people don't know Children of Ether because a lot of people don't read credits. But in Children of Ether, you know, I also brought in a brother, you know, Brandon Easton, who's currently about to have a good, you know, head story editor turn on an upcoming animated series called Ianu on HBO Max.
Yes.
He's the story editor of that show. And I brought him on board back in 2015 to help me sort of develop some of the world rules, because the story takes place in New York City. And Brandon and I worked before on my first comic book series. He was my writer on a comic I did with Dreamwave called Arcanium. So me and Brandon and Ronald, we, you know, me working with those folks and bringing them in makes sure that it's not just my vision, but I have brothers who I've done stuff with who can bring that flair. So the Japanese can just take that and run with it. And so Children of Ether wasn't that difficult, mainly because when you have people who are familiar with the work, then it makes it easier to work with them. So the character animation designer, because there's a difference, between an original character designer and the animation character designer. The original character designer could be anybody. It could be Rob Liefeld, because he's just designing the characters. But the animation director, animation character designer has to then take that look and simplify it in the style of an animatable show so that animators can come in and reference that. And I was really blessed to have a character designer, Hiroshi Shimizu, who is the animation director and character designer of Michiko Tahachin. And so he was already on the level, with incorporating socially literate ideas about Black features and Black coded animated shows, working on that, the Black Brazilian animated series. And so that, I didn't have to worry about that. That's his lane.
Are there kind of like character Bibles that exist, like kind of like lips and eyes and ears?
Well, I mean, it depends on the character designer, and it also depends on the team. Sometimes you don't need much, because if you got really talented illustrators, most of these animators are brilliant. They can draw anything. And so you just give them a formula that works and they can follow it. And then of course the animation director's job is to come in and fix stuff at the Ginga level. And so that's never a concern. Cannon Buses was designed by Thomas Romaine, the original designs. And my intention behind that show was to play around with different ideas of what Black design looks like in anime. So Sam is like a classic Moe character design. Philly the Kid is kind of along that, Watanabe, Shinichiro, kind of
Definitely
flavor, like Spice
Watanabe.
Beagle kind of vibe. And fans who are familiar with those projects might pick up on that. Casey is just steampunk technology. She's like a porcelain doll type character. And then when you look at the show, some characters look like Moe, other characters look super realistic and Black. And so for me, I was just using Cannon Buses to play around with that concept. Like Sam's design and like a character named Hilda, who later comes on in the show. She's a big, strong warrior woman who has short afro, and she's got vitiligo. And her design doesn't look at all the same as Sam's. And so I was very intentional in changing those characters. There's one character in episode 2 named Bob. It's him, and it's kind of like the family that the team meets in episodes 2 and 3 is kind of like a play on, The Hills Have Eyes. It's like this weird shit kicker family who like kills people and lures them in, takes their skin and stuff like that. And so the designs of those characters, I think Bob, when his design first came in, he had his head turn, came in, and my job is to look at the character designs that are not the main characters. And so when the head design came in, he had the sausage lips. I don't know if anyone's familiar
what
with
is sausage lip?
Sausage lip is a nickname that's been pervasive online and overall since Black Americans have been engaging with anime and its aesthetics and how they depict certain races. This is just me speaking. I'm not speaking for anyone else. And it's a heavy play on the imitation of minstrel show images for us back in the 1920s and the 1910s. Negative, reductive image depictions of Black Americans for entertainment and show. And white America is the distributor of these images. We don't have any Black-owned distribution companies sending stuff to Japan saying, draw us like this. And so they're copying this stuff, and it's becoming just part of the style when they depict Black people. And it's weird to say it because I'm saying it as a North American citizen, not as a Japanese person. They don't have the same concept of American racism, in my experience, the way we do. They're just doing what's normal because they don't know. It's kind of like The Simpsons. How long have we had that Indian, convenience guy, before Adi Shankar called it out, right? And so it's just these things that over time we learn is just wrong, And I think Japan was in a similar space. And so when the sausage lips came, I did this whole email with them. And it wasn't negative. It was just
email.
Basically like, and my translator and interpreter, who's also my executive assistant, Jake Ayers, shout out to Jake Ayers, had to translate all this stuff. And it's me basically giving, in a nutshell, saying like, listen, like, this is a pervasive look that is done in Japanese manga artists for a very long time. Because I don't credit the animators, because these shows are adapted from manga. It's the manga artists who are doing this stuff, right? And so this is a look that is, viewed as offensive in certain countries, in particular the United States. And I didn't get all the way into it. I just wanted to let them know that this is not something that would fly over well for certain parts of the American viewing public if we were to release this, one. And two, here's some photos of other animes over time next to the minstrel show stuff, the step and fetch shit. And so, my director, Natori-san, was like, oh, okay, cool. And so I had to literally redraw the lips the way I wanted them to look, and then I did that whole email and I sent it to him. And that's just an example of some of the cultural differences that you might encounter if you choose to be in the privileged position to get millions of dollars and pay Japanese animators to draw black people for 12 episodes straight.
Also, but still, you could have, it could have turned into an episode of the Boondocks, right? You could have came in there and turned all the way up. So it's also good, good leadership. It's also, good understanding of how to manage.
Yeah, it's different. It's different when it's coming here and I'm around my black folk and I have to explain it versus being in their country, in their town, in their city, in their system that I'm trying to, assimilate to and explain it to them. Just interpreting it a little bit different and not being hostile, like having to suppress my, dormant anger. You know what I'm saying? Whenever I see that stuff and just be in an understanding perspective and say, yeah, I'm not going to say this isn't a good look because even that's kind of negative. You know what I'm saying? And so it's like, yeah, this is a thing. This is what it was. This is what it's been. And this is where it comes from. And he was like, oh, wow, I hadn't even, we just think that's a cool stylistic approach. And it's like, they don't have any connection to it. And so, and then it's funny, after that, I think when I first introduced Hilda's character, it was the opposite. When I sent that design, our reference design for Hilda was, I forget the name of the model, who's famous for having the vitiligo on her face. She's a very, very pretty woman, but she's got this, pattern on her face where she's like mixed and, skin discoloration.
Winnie Harlow, yeah.
Is that her name? Thank you so much. Thank you. And so
yeah, I didn't say. I just took it from her. You know what I'm saying?
No doubt. Love your hair. And so, Natori-san, who's my technical director of the series, after having this, conversation with him episodes prior, was like, yeah, but isn't that going to be offensive if you show her that way?
Wow.
As an American asking that, I'm saying, wow. But as a Japanese person, he's like, okay, so black people, this face, bad, but I probably don't think this is pretty either. Isn't it insulting to show this? And I'm like, no, it's the opposite. We're uplifting by highlighting that we don't see this stuff. So they just don't understand the complexities of the different histories of American citizens in this country and their relationship with their white overseers. Everyone has a different relationship in this country. Their people has a different relationship with the white overseers of this country. Black Americans and Native Americans have the oldest relationship with the white overseers of this country. So we have different grievances than the new immigrants who are coming in and trying to fit into the POC space. And so they don't understand that either. And this is, again, all my perspective. I'm not speaking for anyone else because I have to explain this shit in an animated show. And so, and on top of that, if I don't get it right when it comes to the States, can you imagine? There was another thing that was interesting about the business aspect of it, and I want to talk a little bit about that, was the voice recording for the show.
Got it. Perfect.
Okay, and so this is give you an idea of what I learned mostly about the industry. When we were trying to when we were locking the budget with Netflix and John Dardarian for Cannabuses, in that budget comes with a recording budget. Shout out to NYAV Post, Michael Simpson Nicholas, Stephanie Shea, those are my people. They always do the voice work on my shows. And so something happened along the line, again, my point about them negotiating a deal with the studio and then not checking in with the writers. They also didn't factor in the dubbing process because Netflix is localizing this language. The original language of Cannabuses is in Japanese, but it was localized in like 10, 15 different languages because Netflix is in 191 countries.
Exactly.
And they have over 351 subscribers. And so when they release content, it takes about a month and a half, 2 months to localize the show before it's ready on site. And so because we were in such a hurry to lock a deal, there was no budget factored in for union rate voice actors. And union is more expensive than non-union voice actors. And the little reason why that's important is because all of the dubbing in the United States is mostly non-union, to my understanding, and some of it's becoming more union, but
it's starting, but it's mostly
most
non-union.
of it's non-union. And what Jerome didn't understand, and not just Jerome, I don't want to say Jerome, I don't want to single him out. It's not him, it's just everyone, a collective of learning these things when you're trying to do new things that is sensitive in the United States, but also, you realize how deep it goes into the business aspect of it, is that most non-union voice actors for dubbing for localized anime are white. The studios that own those dubbing houses are white. There are no black-owned dubbing studios. They're just not. And so all of the union talent, all the black voice acting talent, commercials, acting, all the top tier stuff, they're all union. And so if you're budgeting my show and it's all non-union, then that means everybody that's going to voice on my show are white, and that would just be a career suicide. That I launched Cannon Busters, and all of my voice actors who are black coded are white characters, white voice actors, and so we had to go back and add an extra $8,000 per episode in order to make the dubbing session for every episode union, so that I can then find a Ken Michaels or you know what I'm saying, and get all these different black voice actors. And so this is an example of how pervasive, the disparity between black agency at the creative level and at the production level is. You're seeing it now. There's a lot more black voice actors doing localizing in anime, and they're starting to become heroes. Some of those people, especially for the viewing audience, but it's still a thing.
But also too, even within that, right? Like this large production, and you have a bit of an oversight, right? It's a challenge, So imagine, it's you and your 3 friends animating something, and you're like, oh, did you even think about union versus non-union? You're right. These are things that they need to know for sure.
Yeah, everything was happening so fast and so quickly. Even in my head, I was like, okay, we're good. They got that figured out. But that's the other part about being able to speak to everyone when you're doing something new. Not everyone is on the level. And sometimes white folks are so uncomfortable that they don't even want to talk about it. They just want to make an assumption that it's going to be okay. And I understand that too. And so you have to be that person that's like, hey, by the way, black girl, she's got to look this way. And some people are uncomfortable talking about race, depending on who you talk to, so they don't even want to have a discussion about it. They just want to make an assumption. And so you have to sometimes be that person and be like, okay, cool. We can't have sausage lips. Well, what's sausage lips? I can explain it to you later. Let's just change it. You know what I mean? Because you want to get the project going and back on track. And so that's another example of what, you encounter when you talk about the cultural differences, things that you have to be aware of and how much it affects the budget. When we found out that it was a non-union project, we got scared because the deal was already locked. And so that meant we had to go back to Netflix and ask for an additional $8,000 per episode when everything was already locked. And so I was really nervous about that. But anyway, I sat down with John Adarian and I explained the whole situation to him. I said, anyway, I can't be releasing some minstrel show anime cartoon. And he was like, no problem. Tell me whatever you need. Because he understood. And so we were able to get that set up. And, and then once that was set up, then we were able to get, NYAB Post and Stephanie Shea and start casting who we needed to cast for the role and get all the people we need to get in there. And so when we did Children of Ether with Crunchyroll, it was different because NYAB Post was already attached to it. And NYAB Post is union. And so they're excellent at finding, diverse voices in TV animation. I recommend NYAB Post over anyone because I think they're the boutique voice acting studio that is like, it's art for them. All of their voice acted, all of their localized dubbing and casting and voice acting shows are Oscar nominated. They do all of the Mamoru Hosoda stuff. Stephanie Shea just won an Oscar for voice direction for The Boy and the Heron, because NYAB Post, voice directed that. And so for me, all of my shows, Cannon Busters, Children of Ether, Yasuke, even my current Netflix original that's in production right now.
Hold on. We're going to we got another one coming.
Yeah, we got another one coming.
Another one coming. Exclusive. Boom, boom, boom.
And so for me, even my current project that I'm working on, they're my team because I've known them for a very long time. And those things are very important because a lot of times you get so excited, and you also don't want to rock the boat because you know how rare it is to have this opportunity. You almost don't want to we already got the deal, it's closed. But then this thing happens, and then this thing happens.
How long? I mean, so what's the half-life, man? Because you get the deal, this comes out 3 years, 4 years later.
I mean, each episode from script to final delivery is roughly around 60 to 80 weeks per episode. And they're all staggered. And so you're looking at 2.5, 3 years production. That's a long time working with the same people. And so
that's how you have the families and the births and the right?
You learn to it's a different level. It's one thing to talk to a few people, and then it's another thing. The other thing, you don't know how people are looking at you when you have that many people on your work. So there's an unfortunate part of being a performer when you're trying to communicate to people because everyone wants to be spoken to differently. And that that's a life skill that you have to develop when you're managing millions and millions of dollars. People want to brag about working on your show. They want to have a good experience with you. And when you move on and you get another project, You want to go back to those folks. If you don't have that experience, because the industry's small, everyone goes and they're like, yo, if you have a bad experience, it's, yeah, what did you work on last? Man, I'm working on this gaijin. It's Japanese because I'm speaking English. They're probably talking in Japanese, but I'm working on this gaijin project, man. These gaijin, they don't know what the fuck they're doing, man. I'm done with that. I'm going to work with my homies on Naruto. You know what I'm saying? And that's the way it is. And so it's an eye-opening experience that it's a relationship with people. It's a delicate balance of having a clear vision, having the experience to navigate these experiences, and navigating personalities.
And so in understanding those relationships, I mean, we can't once over the fact that we have this gallery show of the production work of Yasuke, right? And we have this amazing book, but come on, man, you have the Avengers of Japanese animators and animation production team that worked on Yasuke. Those are a hell of a good relationship. So,
yeah.
What was that like over those years?
Well, for me, it's when it comes to talent, there are eras of talent and there are eras of studios in Japan. At one point, Madhouse was the top studio. And so the names at those studios working on those shows were big. Now you have the era of, Studio Wit, you have the era of Science Saru, you have the era of MAPPA, and all of the animation greats and artists who are working on those shows that everyone loves. Now that we're in the social media era where everyone's accessible and engaging, you can see the language online where people are name dropping this director. Oh, he worked on God of High School. He's working on this. It's going to be crazy. Like, it's just so exciting to see that energy because, we don't normally get to see that. And so for me, all of the people who worked on my show are from the Madhouse era. And I don't think Black Americans have had a long experience of this generation with the history of the anime greats. They usually tether it to popular animated shows, as the greats. But I see more people saying, "Oh, I love Hunter x Hunter," but they don't know who the fuck worked on Hunter x Hunter. Do you understand what I'm saying? Or they like the black girl on Hunter x Hunter, but they don't know who the character designer is. They don't know who the animation director was.
But they want to run their own stuff, though. They want their own IP.
Yeah, but they know who certain characters. So for me, I say that to say that, with you prefacing that, for me, all of the people who work with me on Yasuke are from an era that I grew up when I was in my teens and early 20s. And so you have Yutaka Minoa. He's my assistant animation director on Yasuke. He's the animation director and character designer of Ninja Scroll and Vampire Hunter D. To me, that's a flex. In terms of like
flex,
yeah,
for real.
And from a nerd perspective, that's a creative flex, or getting Takeshi Koike, who's the writer and director of Redline. He animated on the opening of he did all the animated openings of Samurai Champloo. All that stuff is Takeshi Koike with the black heart, black lines and stuff. That guy created and directed Redline. He's my animation character designer on Yasuke. And so a lot of people don't know who these guys are, because those animes that they watch, especially this generation, was a little bit before their time. And I don't know how each of these kids this generation feel about those folks, but when you say heavyweights, it can be an obscure statement to make because a lot of these kids don't know who these guys are. And so for me, the people who worked on Yasuke are people that I looked up to who played a significant role in the animes that I like. And a lot of stuff that I like are niche things because I'm an auteur. I consider myself an animation auteur. When you see a LeSean Thomas project, it's likely, LeSean Thomas probably made that because I've been consistently producing high quality 2D animated adventure shows that center black characters with high production values. Outside of me, it's probably going to be Boondocks on Black Dynamite. And people see it and go, oh, that looks like Boondocks, because Boondocks was the only show for a good 10-year run that forced people to look at high quality drawing design of black characters. And we don't really do that a lot. And so whenever someone else does it, they usually go, oh, it looks like Boondocks. They don't realize that, it's a fantasy. There's no Black American subversive comedy in this, but they still say Boondocks because that's the consumer perspective. They're trying to identify the product. And so for me, with these talents, it's just an opportunity for me to teach people who these greats are, and that's the whole purpose of me starting this film series this weekend. All of the shows that I created, all of the shows that I'm presenting are intentional. We talked about this. Remember when we came with the list, you asked me, so what are your favorite animes? We did the list, and I was like, oh, great, let's do a series. And I was like, oh, wait a minute. The reason why I'm choosing these animes is because all of these classic animes that people like, Demon City Shinjuku, for example, Satoshi Iwataki-san and Naoyuki Anda worked on that show. Satoshi Iwataki is my animation director for Yasuke. Naoyuki Anda is the assistant animation director for Yasuke. Sword of the Stranger, That's a classic Jidaigeki Samurai anime. The director of that is Masahiro Ando. He's the director of episode 4 of Yasuke. These are all people that are heroes to me, but kids may not be familiar with. And so that's the purpose of the book. And the whole reason why I wanted to name those films is because not only do I want to share our love for this East Asian pop culture, but I also want to subtly communicate to the viewer and the fan who shows up to this stuff that you can be more than a fan of this stuff. You can work with these guys on your own stuff. And that's the intention of why I'm doing that and why I'm feathering all this stuff, because I'm trying to present the idea of something. I'm not the guy. I'm just an idea. And as long as I'm visible, it's like, okay, I didn't like that. But now you're screwed because I made it in Japan. What you gonna do now? Now you gotta do it.
Now you gotta do it.
Now you gotta do it. So, you hear this online, when people complain. And I'm not online, if y'all familiar with that. I'm not online. But I lurk from time to time, and I see a lot of passion from the fan base and people who really want to see more of themselves. And the way they draw attention to themselves is to do, Twitter and social media is a hotbed for being controversial and drawing attention to yourself. Even if it's negative, you want to get likes and views and be controversial. And in the space of anime and fandom and consumption, some of the arguments with a lot of these kids, they'll take a picture of Goku and make him black. And then there's like a million arguments about and you got closeted xenophobic anime fans who secretly have an affinity for Japan's purity, and they don't want niggas in cartoons, and so they're like, make your own anime. And then because anime is still a spectrum, and there's so many entry points. And so, they'll say, make your own anime. And then you make it, and it's like, yeah, but don't do it like that. Do you understand what I'm saying? And so
100%.
You can't make stuff for those people when you're doing things that have never been done before. You just have to, present the idea. And then hopefully other people will see it and go, oh, that's cool that he did that, but I don't have to like it. But okay, you don't have to like it, but what are you doing? Let's add more to the conversation, And so that's the intent behind a lot of stuff I do in that space.
Awesome. LeSean Thomas, y'all. Give him a round of applause. I want to say thank you so much for coming out, and I hope that this served as a bit of a masterclass to connect to your classes that you're currently taking, and understand that in order to do the things that you want to do, there are certain things that you have to do, right? And certain things that you don't have to do, and I think LeSean really punctuated that, very much so. What I want to do, and because this is our last talk, and hopefully Peter will let me get 3 minutes to do this, I would really like LeSean to give us his last thought, because this is the last time we'll have this conversation. I'm very happy, we talk to high school kids, and we talk to, SVA, NYU, and you now are the amalgamation of the creatives coming out of these universities. Some of you are paying for it. Much love for you. I'll give you some hugs. And so, what I would like you to do, LeSean, is as someone who is a creative leader, leave us with a thought or an idea, a concept that we can then take and
something my girlfriend had mentioned to me this week, and we talked a little about yesterday, and all of these things that have been discussed over the week, is that a rising tide lifts all boats, right? I got that expression right.
You did it.
And I would like to see us uplift each other more. When you see someone who's inspiring you, or someone who's, doing something you've never seen before, give them props, give them their flowers, because everybody, is all trying to do the same thing. I know we all have our own motivations, and this industry is so incredibly competitive. It forces us to sort of cannibalize ourselves because everyone's trying to get the bag and trying to get their show off the ground. But you got to remember that, this is the generation that's going to take it to the next level. Everyone in this room, you're going to learn how to network. Your networks are going to be your strongest connections when you go into this industry. I see it at the industry level. All of the people, 80% of Cartoon Network are all Cal Arts graduates at the administrative level. And so I think it's really important that we maintain a sense of community. And when I say community, I'm not talking about fandom community. Fandom is transactional, in my opinion. I'm talking about the creative level. I think it's really important that we uplift each other, we support each other, or try to, because the industry makes us shy about giving props to our person because it makes us look like we're a D writer, or they may pick them over us because of the scarcity mindset, and we tend to be really quiet about that. But I really can't stress it enough. When you put out projects like this, it really does bring a lot of people together, and I think you're going to get more talent and more opportunities from people by continuing to lift each other up. So, give props to the person and show who's inspiring you, you know what I mean? And I think you'll see the benefits of that down the line. That's all I wanted to say.
I want to do that now. Thank you.
No,
Thank you. Can we stand up and give him a...
We have a really talented artist upstairs called Aki Bright. Y'all should check out his stuff when you can. There's a cool little gallery outside of the Yasuke. And if you want to purchase the book, I think they're running out really quick, but this is a 260-page art book on the making of Yasuke, the production of Yasuke. It's called The TV Anime Creations of LeSean Thomas, Volume 1. And it's just an encapsulation of everything we talked about today and this week inside this book. So if you get a chance, get a copy before they run out.
How much? We don't know.